Commander Velthar stood on the observation deck of the Galactic Coalition flagship, his forearms clasped behind his back. His scales gleamed under the artificial lights as he watched the newest members of the Coalition arrive. The human vessels looked small and primitive compared to the massive warships of the Kryn Empire. He had studied their kind for months now, reading through their military history with what could only be described as amusement. The humans called themselves fierce warriors. They spoke of their wars with pride. But Velthar had seen real war. He had commanded fleets in 147 conflicts across the galaxy. His people, the Kryn, had perfected warfare into a science. Every movement calculated, every strategy tested, every outcome predicted before the first shot was fired. The humans, by comparison, were children playing with toys. He pulled up the data file on his display screen. Human history was full of conflicts, yes, but they were messy and emotional. They fought with outdated weapons. They made decisions based on feelings rather than logic. They threw away perfectly good tactical advantages because of something they called honor or compassion. It was inefficient. It was wasteful. It was, in Velthar's professional opinion, primitive. The lead human ship docked with the flagship. Its name was painted on the hull in their strange alphabet, Defiant Phoenix. Velthar found the name amusing. Humans loved their symbols and their dramatic words. The Kryn named their ships with numbers and designations. Ship 447 did not need a personality. It needed to function. Captain Deho was the first aboard. He was tall for a human, with dark hair and eyes that seemed to take in everything at once. He saluted in the human way, one hand to his forehead. Velthar returned the gesture with all four of his arms. A sign of respect that the captain probably did not understand was actually quite generous. "Welcome to the Coalition, Captain," Velthar said. His translator device rendered the words into human language perfectly. "Thank you, Commander," Deho replied. His voice was calm and measured. "My crew is honored to serve." Over the next week, Velthar observed the human crews carefully. They performed their duties well enough. They followed orders. They maintained their ships properly. But he noticed something strange. They were quiet. Too quiet. When Kryn warriors prepared for battle, they boasted and challenged each other. They displayed their strength. The humans just worked in silence, their faces showing nothing. Lieutenant Hana ran tactical simulations every day. She was small and serious, rarely speaking unless necessary. Engineer Taijun spent 18 hours a day in the engine room, adjusting and readjusting systems that were already functioning perfectly. The medical officer, Ji-Wan, organized supplies with an intensity that seemed excessive for someone whose job was to heal rather than fight. Velthar mentioned his observations to his second-in-command. "They are nervous," he said. "They know they are out of their depth here. They hide their fear with silence and busy work." His second-in-command agreed. The humans were a support role, nothing more. They would carry supplies, maintain communications, perhaps rescue damaged ships. They were not frontline material. Not yet. Maybe not ever. Then the reports came in. The Ravagers had been detected at the edge of Coalition space. Velthar felt his blood quicken with anticipation. The Ravagers were a true challenge. They were a nomadic species that consumed entire planets. They had destroyed 12 civilizations before the Coalition had even formed. This would be a real war, not a simple border skirmish. The Coalition fleet assembled. Velthar calculated their chances and found them acceptable. The Ravagers were fierce, but they were predictable. They attacked in waves. They relied on overwhelming numbers. Standard defensive formations would hold. Counterattacks would be launched at optimal moments. Casualties would be kept to acceptable levels. Victory would be achieved in approximately 48 hours. Captain Deho requested a private meeting. Velthar granted it, curious what the human wanted. They met in a small conference room. The captain stood at attention, but his eyes held something Velthar could not quite identify. "Commander, I request permission for the human fleet to operate independently during the engagement," Deho said. Velthar was surprised. "For what purpose, Captain?" "My people have trained for combat scenarios. We would like to prove our worth to the Coalition." Velthar considered this. It was foolish, but perhaps the humans needed to learn their limitations. However, he could not risk Coalition assets on human pride. "Request denied, Captain. You will maintain your assigned support position. You lack the experience for frontline combat." Something flickered across Deho's face. It was gone too quickly for Velthar to analyze. The captain saluted and left without another word. That night, Velthar reviewed human military history again. He wanted to understand what made them think they were ready for this. He read about their world wars, where millions died in trenches and cities burned. He read about smaller conflicts where they fought over resources and ideology. He read about terrorism and resistance movements and guerrilla warfare. What he saw was chaos. Humans fought without proper strategy. They held positions that should have been abandoned. They launched attacks that had no logical purpose. They died for pieces of land that had no strategic value. They cried over their dead instead of calculating replacement rates. They made memorials and held ceremonies instead of moving efficiently to the next objective. The Kryn way was better. When a Kryn warrior fell, another took their place. No tears, no ceremony. Just the continuation of the mission. War was about winning, not about feelings. The humans had not learned this lesson even after thousands of years of conflict. Velthar closed the files and made a note in his personal log. Humans lack the discipline and ferocity required for true warfare. They are too emotional, too attached to individual lives, too willing to abandon logic for sentiment. They will serve adequately in support roles, but they will never be true warriors. They do not understand what war really is. He looked out at the stars where the Ravager fleet was approaching. Soon he would demonstrate to the humans what real warfare looked like. The Kryn had perfected it over 3,000 years. Mathematics and strategy would win the day as they always did. Velthar had no way of knowing how wrong he was. He had studied human history, but he had not understood it. He had seen their wars, but he had not seen what drove them. He had counted their dead, but he had not felt their grief. He thought he knew war. He was about to learn the difference between war as a science and war as a fury, and the lesson would terrify him. Velthar could not look away from the tactical display. The battle at New Haven was not following any pattern he had ever seen. The human ships moved like wounded animals, striking without regard for their own survival. They were supposed to be the support fleet, the cautious ones. Instead, they fought like creatures possessed. A human cruiser took heavy damage to its port side. Standard procedure would be to retreat for repairs. Instead, the ship turned directly into the Ravager formation and detonated its reactor core. The explosion took 3 Ravager vessels with it. Velthar saw the escape pods launching just seconds before the blast. The crew had known exactly what they were doing. Insane, his second-in-command whispered. They are all insane. But Velthar was not so sure anymore. There was a pattern here, just not one he recognized. The humans were not fighting to win. They were fighting to make the enemy hurt. Every action was calculated not for tactical advantage but for maximum damage to the Ravagers. It was inefficient in terms of standard warfare, but it was terrifyingly effective in terms of raw destruction. Lieutenant Hana's voice came over the communication channels they were monitoring. Target the command ships. Ignore the fighters. Make them feel it where it counts. Her targeting solutions were visible on Velthar's display. She was right. She was ignoring threats to focus on high-value targets. It should have gotten her ships destroyed. But the Ravagers were not fighting back properly. They were confused, disorganized. They kept trying to fall back and the humans kept pursuing. Engineer Tae-jun was doing something incredible with the human ship's power systems. He was running the reactors at levels that should have caused immediate meltdowns. The ships were moving faster than they should. Weapons were firing at rates that exceeded their specifications. Every human vessel was being pushed beyond its limits. Reactor temperature at critical, Velthar heard from one of the human ships. We have maybe 10 minutes before containment fails. Then we have 10 minutes to kill as many of them as possible, came the reply. A human fighter squadron approached a Ravager battleship. The battleship's defensive weapons should have destroyed them easily, but the humans did not evade. They did not try defensive maneuvers. They flew straight through the weapons fire. Half the squadron was destroyed. The other half reached the battleship and targeted its engine core. One pilot's transmission came through clearly. Her name was Subin and her fighter was on fire. "This is for the children in the shelters," she said calmly. Then she crashed her burning fighter directly into the battleship's bridge. The battleship went dark. Dead in space. A capital ship destroyed by a single fighter pilot who had chosen to die to make it happen. Velthar realized he was witnessing something that should not be possible. Individual humans were sacrificing themselves not because they were ordered to, but because they chose to. Not for strategic gain, not for territory or resources. They were doing it because they were angry, because they had seen what happened to New Haven, because somewhere in their strange emotional brains, they had decided that revenge was worth dying for. Medic Jiwan's voice appeared on the command channel. "Captain, I need to report casualties." "Not now, Jiwan," Daeho replied. His ship was missing half its armor plating and still firing every weapon it had. "Sir, we have wounded who need immediate evacuation." "There is no evacuation. Everyone knew that when we came here. Keep them comfortable. We will mourn them later. Right now we finish this," Velthar understood then. The humans had not come to New Haven expecting to survive. They had come expecting to die. But they had chosen to die taking as many Ravagers with them as possible. It was not a rescue mission. It was a revenge mission. And revenge did not require survival. The battle had been going on for 2 hours. By all logic, the human fleet should have been destroyed. They were outnumbered. They were outgunned. They had taken horrific damage. Velthar counted 15 human ships destroyed completely. 20 more were barely functioning, but the Ravager fleet was in worse shape. 27 of their ships were gone. The rest were damaged and trying to retreat. The species that had terrorized the galaxy for centuries was running away from humans. Velthar opened a communication channel to Captain Daeho. He had to understand this. "Captain, this is Commander Velthar. Your losses are unsustainable. You must withdraw while you still can." Daeho's face appeared on the screen. He was bleeding from a cut on his forehead. His uniform was torn. Behind him, Velthar could see sparks falling from damaged systems. The captain looked exhausted, but his eyes were still hard and cold. "Commander, with respect, we did not come here to withdraw. You came here to die? For what purpose? The colony is already lost. We came here to make sure the Ravagers never attack another defenseless colony. We came here to teach them fear." "Fear? They are animals. They do not understand fear." "Then they will learn," Daeho said. "Every species can learn fear. Watch." The captain closed the communication. Velthar watched as the remaining human ships formed up for a final assault. There were only 12 vessels still capable of fighting. Against them were 16 Ravager ships, all trying to escape to quantum jump distance. The humans pursued. They were slower now, damaged, limping, but they did not stop. Lieutenant Hana's voice came through, reading off coordinates. Engineer Taejun was somehow keeping the ships running despite damage that should have killed them. Medic Jiwan had left the medical bay and was manually loading weapons. A Ravager destroyer turned to fight. It was a mistake. 3 human ships converged on it and tore it apart with concentrated fire. They did not stop firing even after it was dead. They reduced it to debris and then moved to the next target. Velthar saw something on his sensors that he had never seen before. The Ravager ships were broadcasting a signal. It took him a moment to understand what it was. A retreat call, a warning. They were telling the rest of their fleet to avoid this sector. To avoid the humans. 1 Ravager battleship made it to jump distance. It began the quantum sequence. Then Captain Daeho's ship, barely holding together, made one last acceleration. It was not fast enough to catch the battleship. But Daeho launched every remaining missile his ship had. The missiles crossed the distance and struck just as the battleship entered quantum space. The quantum drive exploded. The battleship was torn apart across multiple dimensions. It was a horrible way to die. Velthar had seen it happen before in accidents. No one survived a quantum drive failure. The remaining Ravager ships stopped trying to jump. They surrendered instead. Actually surrendered. Transmitted the universal signal for capitulation. Velthar checked his records. The Ravagers had never surrendered before. Not once in recorded history. The battle was over. The humans had won, but the cost was terrible. 22 human ships had been destroyed. 12 more were so damaged they would never fight again. Out of the 50 vessels that had come to New Haven, only 16 were still spaceworthy. And those 16 were barely functional. Velthar calculated the casualties. 73% of the human fleet was gone. By any standard military assessment, this was a disaster. The humans had traded 3 ships for every 2 Ravager vessels. The exchange rate was terrible, but the Ravagers were gone. All of them, dead or captured. And they had learned something that would spread through their entire species. They had learned that humans were dangerous, that attacking human colonies meant facing an enemy that would destroy you, even if it destroyed themselves in the process. Velthar looked at his tactical display one more time. The debris field around New Haven would take years to clear. 2 million colonists were dead. The human fleet was devastated. By all logical measures, this was a tragedy with a minor military victory. But as he watched the surviving human ships begin rescue operations, pulling their wounded from damaged vessels, he understood something profound. The humans had not come here for a military victory. They had come here to send a message. And the message was clear: hurt us and we will hurt you back, even if it costs us everything. Especially if it costs us everything. Because humans did not calculate acceptable losses when they were angry. They calculated maximum revenge. Velthar thought he had known war. He had been wrong. This was not war as he understood it. This was something more primal, more terrible. This was war without the safety of logic, war driven by pure emotion, and he never wanted to be on the receiving end of it. The surviving human ships limped back to Coalition space over the next 3 days. Velthar had wanted to send rescue vessels, but Captain Deho had refused. "We take care of our own," the human had said simply. So Velthar watched as the damaged fleet slowly made its way home, dragging their dead with them. They refused to leave anyone behind, even the bodies. When they finally docked at the Coalition station, Velthar was waiting. He needed to understand what had happened. The military tribunal could wait. First, he needed answers. He requested permission to board the Defiant Phoenix. It was granted, though the response took several minutes. When Velthar entered the ship, he understood why. The interior was devastated. Walls were scorched. Systems sparked and flickered. The air smelled of burned metal and something else. Something organic and unpleasant. Captain Deho met him in what was left of the bridge. The human looked like he had aged 10 years in 3 days. His arm was in a medical brace. His face was bruised. He walked with a slight limp. But he stood straight and saluted when Velthar entered. "Commander," Deho said quietly. "Captain," Velthar replied. "I need to understand what happened at New Haven." Deho nodded slowly. "I can show you if you want. But I warn you, it is not easy to watch." He led Velthar to a small room where they had set up a temporary display screen. Deho pulled up the recordings from their approach to New Haven. Velthar watched silently as the images played. The burning cities, the destroyed shelters, the final transmission from the child. He had read the reports. But seeing it was different. The child's voice stayed with him even after the recording ended. Young, terrified, calling for help that had not come in time. "We saw this," Deho said. "Every ship, every crew member. We all saw it and heard it." "And you decided to attack," Velthar said. "We decided we could not let it go unanswered. We could not let the Ravagers believe they could do this without consequences. But you sacrificed so much, 73% casualties. By any military standard, that is unacceptable." Deho looked at him for a long moment. "Commander, you are Kryn. You have been fighting wars for thousands of years. You are very good at it. But you fight wars for territory, for resources, for strategic advantage. You calculate acceptable losses and optimal outcomes. That is correct. That is how war should be fought." "Maybe," Deho said, "but that is not how humans fight." "Not when it matters," Velthar did not understand. "Explain." Lieutenant Hanna entered the room. She looked even worse than her captain. Her hands trembled slightly as she poured herself water. "Commander Velthar, may I speak freely?" "Please do, Lieutenant." "You calculated the battle at New Haven and determined it was not worth saving. The strategic value was too low. The casualties would be too high. The math did not work out. I understand that calculation. It makes sense from a purely logical standpoint." She paused and took a drink. Her hands were still shaking. "But we did not calculate for strategic value. We calculated for something else. Revenge, justice, call it what you want. We saw those people die. We saw children in shelters calling for help. And we decided that the creatures who did that needed to die. All of them. Even if we died doing it." Engineer Taijun joined them. He was covered in grease and burn marks. "Every human on every ship made the same choice, Commander. We knew we probably would not survive. We did it anyway. Not because we were ordered to. Captain Deho gave us the option to retreat. Some of us voted to stay. It was unanimous. Velthar felt something he rarely felt. Confusion. But why? The colony was already lost. Your deaths would not bring them back." "No," Deho agreed. But our deaths would ensure the Ravagers thought twice before attacking another defenseless colony. We made it costly for them. So costly that they will remember. They will tell other Ravagers. They will avoid human territories. And maybe, just maybe, some future colony will survive because we made the Ravagers afraid. Medic Jiwan appeared in the doorway. She looked haunted. Commander, I am a doctor. My job is to save lives. But at New Haven, I redirected life support power to weapons. I helped kill instead of heal. Do you know why? Velthar shook his head. Because I saw the readings from the planet. I saw the life signs disappear. Thousands of them. All at once. And I thought about my own family back on Earth. My nieces and nephews. I imagined them in those shelters, scared and calling for help. And I could not let the creatures who did that live. I just could not. Velthar was beginning to understand. The humans had not fought a calculated battle. They had fought a personal battle. Every single one of them had taken it personally. As if the colonists on New Haven were their own families. You fight for each other, he said slowly, not for territory or strategy. You fight for your people. We fight for all people, Deho corrected. The colonists on New Haven were not all human. They were Kryn there too, and Vendari, and Plix, 16 different species. We did not ask what species the children in the shelters were. We only knew they were children, innocents, and someone killed them. Velthar accessed the New Haven colony records. Deho was right. Only 40% of the population had been human. The rest were from various coalition species. The humans had gone to die for a colony that was not even primarily their own people. This makes no strategic sense, Velthar said. No, Hana agreed. It makes emotional sense. There is a difference. Velthar returned to his quarters that night and pulled up human history files again. But this time he read them differently. He had been looking at human wars as military engagements. Now he looked at them as personal conflicts. And suddenly they made sense. Humans did not fight wars the way the Kryn did. They did not calculate optimal outcomes. They fought like every battle was personal. Every loss was personal. Every victory was personal. When humans went to war, they did not see enemies. They saw threats to their families, their homes, their people. That was why they held positions that should be abandoned. Those positions protected something they cared about. That was why they fought without regard for acceptable losses. Because when you are protecting your loved ones, there is no acceptable loss. That was why they made memorials and held ceremonies. Because every death mattered to them personally. The Kryn way was more efficient. But the human way was more terrifying. Because you could negotiate with an enemy who fought for strategic reasons. You could make deals, find compromises. But you could not negotiate with an enemy who fought because you had hurt something they loved. There was no compromise for that. Only victory or death. Velthar began writing a new report. Not a tribunal document, a military analysis. He titled it simply, The Human Way of War. He wrote, I have fought in 147 wars. I thought I understood warfare. I was wrong. Humans do not fight wars the way we do. They fight like every battle is the only battle that matters. They fight like the enemy has personally wronged them. They fight without calculating acceptable losses because when you fight for those you love, no loss is acceptable. He continued. Recommendation to all coalition forces. Never make humanity angry.
Never attack their colonies.
Never harm their civilians. Not because you cannot defeat them in battle, but because even in defeat, they will make you pay a price you cannot afford. They will destroy themselves to destroy you, and they will do it gladly. His final paragraph read, The Ravagers have learned this lesson. Their entire fleet has been warned to avoid human territories. They fear humans now. A species that has terrorized the galaxy for centuries fears a species that only joined the coalition last year. This tells you everything you need to know about the human way of war. He sent the report to Coalition Command and wondered if anyone would believe it. He barely believed it himself, and he had watched it happen. Captain Deho found him 2 days later. Commander, I have been told we face a tribunal for disobeying orders. Yes, Velthar said. I am sorry, Captain. I tried to have it dismissed, but regulations are clear. Deho nodded. I understand. I accept responsibility. My crew was following my orders. No, Velthar said. I read the logs. Your crew voted unanimously to stay and fight. This was a collective decision. Then we will face the tribunal together. Deho said simply. Velthar looked at the human captain, wounded, exhausted, facing military charges, and still standing with quiet dignity. Captain, I need to ask you something. Was it worth it? All those deaths? All that destruction? For revenge? Deho was quiet for a long moment. Commander, 19 years ago, my home city was attacked by pirates. I was just a child. I hid in a shelter with my mother and sister. We waited for someone to save us. Help came, but it came too late for many. My sister did not survive. He met Velthar's eyes. When I heard that child's voice calling for help on New Haven, I heard my sister. Every human heard someone they loved. So yes, Commander, it was worth it. Because maybe somewhere, someday, a child will not have to die in a shelter, because the Ravagers learned to fear us. Velthar finally understood. The humans did not fight wars for strategic reasons. They fought wars to protect children from hiding in shelters. They fought wars so that no one else would hear that desperate call for help that came too late. It was inefficient. It was emotional. It was completely illogical, and it was the most powerful military doctrine Velthar had ever witnessed. 6 months had passed since New Haven. The tribunal had ended with mixed results. Captain Deho and his crew were formally reprimanded for disobeying orders, but they were also quietly decorated for their actions. The coalition leadership understood the value of what had happened, even if they could not officially approve it. Velthar had spent those months doing something he never expected. He had become humanity's advocate within the coalition. He gave lectures at the War College, teaching other species about human military doctrine. At first, his colleagues had thought he was joking. Humans were new, primitive. What could they teach the established powers of the galaxy? Then Velthar showed them the recordings from New Haven. He showed them the tactical data. He showed them the Ravager retreat signals. Species that had terrorized the galaxy for centuries were now avoiding human territories. That got their attention. The humans fight with emotion, Velthar explained to a classroom full of coalition officers. This should be a weakness. In traditional warfare, it is a weakness. But the humans have turned it into a strength. They fight not just to win, but to protect. And when you threaten what they protect, they become unstoppable. A Kryn officer raised one of his forearms. But, Commander, emotional fighting leads to mistakes, poor decisions, unnecessary casualties. Yes, Velthar agreed. By our standards. But human standards are different. They accept higher casualties if it means protecting others. They make decisions that seem illogical, but create psychological effects on the enemy. The Ravagers now fear humans more than any other species. That fear is worth more than 100 strategic victories. The officer was not convinced. Velthar understood. He had not been convinced either, until he had watched it happen. Some lessons could only be learned through experience. That experience came sooner than expected. A new enemy had emerged from the outer regions. They called themselves the Sovereign Collective. They were a species that believed in what they called civilized warfare. They fought with rules. They took prisoners. They spared civilians when possible. They were professional soldiers who saw war as a necessary evil to be conducted with honor. The coalition had faced them twice in border skirmishes. Both times the battles had ended in stalemates. The Sovereigns were good. Very good. They used tactics that Velthar respected. Clean, efficient, honorable. It was almost refreshing after dealing with species like the Ravagers. Then the Sovereigns attacked a coalition world called Meridian. It was a trade hub with mixed populations. The battle went as expected. Both sides maneuvered carefully. The Sovereigns avoided civilian casualties. They followed the rules of engagement. When they captured coalition soldiers, they treated them well. But the stalemate continued for weeks. Neither side could gain the advantage. So the Sovereigns made a decision. They intercepted coalition evacuation ships, ships that were clearly marked as civilian transports, ships carrying refugees to safety. The Sovereigns sent a message: surrender Meridian, or we will execute the refugees. They gave the coalition 12 hours to comply. They were sorry to do this, they said, but war required difficult choices. The civilians would be treated humanely until the executions. It would be quick and painless, most honorable, under the circumstances. Velthar received the message and felt his blood go cold. not because of the threat itself. He had seen worse tactics. No, what chilled him was the name on the list of refugees. Among the 2,000 civilians captured was the family of a human liaison officer named Yun Su, his wife, his 2 children, ages 6 and 9. Velthar found Yun Su in the communication center. The human was staring at a screen, reading the message over and over. His face was blank, completely blank. Velthar recognized that look now. It was the same look Captain Daeho had worn when he heard the child's voice from New Haven. "I am sorry," Velthar said quietly. Yunsu did not respond for a long moment. Then he stood up slowly and walked to the command deck. Velthar followed him. Admiral Daeho was there, coordinating the coalition response. He looked up when Yunsu entered. The 2 humans looked at each other. No words were spoken. None were needed. Daeho simply nodded once. Yunsu nodded back. Then Daeho turned to his communication officer. "Send a message to all human vessels. Full mobilization. We are going to Meridian." The coalition admiral in charge objected. "We are negotiating with the sovereigns. We may be able to reach a diplomatic solution." "No," Daeho said flatly. "There is no diplomatic solution to this. They took civilians. They are threatening to execute them, including children. That is not warfare. That is terrorism. And we do not negotiate with terrorists." "Admiral Daeho, with respect, we cannot risk open war over 2,000 civilians." "Watch us," Daeho replied. Velthar stepped forward. "Coalition, command. I am formally requesting that Admiral Daeho be given command of the Meridian operation." The coalition admiral looked at him in shock. "Commander Velthar, the humans are too emotionally invested. They will make poor decisions." "No," Velthar said. "They will make the only decision that matters. Let me tell you what is about to happen. The humans are going to Meridian whether you authorize it or not. They are going to attack the sovereigns with everything they have. And the sovereigns are going to learn the same lesson the Ravagers learned. You can either support this action and maintain unity, or you can watch from the sidelines, but the humans are going. I recommend you go with them." There was a long silence. Then the coalition admiral sighed. "Very well, Admiral Daeho, you have command. But I am holding you responsible for any violations of engagement protocols." "Understood," Daeho said. "There will be no violations, because we are not following engagement protocols. We are following human protocols." The fleet assembled within hours, not just human ships. Coalition vessels joined them, the Kryn, who had fought beside the Kryn for years. The Vendari, who had seen what humans did at New Haven. Even some Plix who barely had military forces at all. Velthar joined the fleet on Daeho's flagship. The admiral looked at him in surprise. "Commander, you do not need to come. This may get ugly." "I know," Velthar replied. "That is why I need to be here. To witness, to learn, and perhaps to help." The fleet arrived at Meridian 3 days later. The sovereigns were waiting. They sent a transmission immediately. "Coalition forces, you have violated the negotiation period. We are forced to begin executions. This is regrettable but necessary." Daeho's response was broadcast on all channels. "Sovereign Collective, this is Admiral Daeho of the Coalition Fleet. You are holding 2,000 civilians, including women and children. You will release them immediately. You will not harm them. If you do, there will be consequences." The Sovereign Commander replied with confusion in his voice. "Admiral, we understand you are upset. But this is war. Difficult choices must be made. We will treat the prisoners with honor until the end." "You still do not understand," Daeho said quietly. "Let me explain. You have made a mistake. You have threatened children. You have tried to use civilians as weapons. That is not warfare. That is the end of negotiations. You have 1 hour to release all prisoners unharmed. After that, we stop asking nicely." The hour passed. The sovereigns did not release the prisoners. They executed 10 of them as a demonstration of their resolve. They broadcast the executions to show they were serious. It was the worst decision they ever made. Velthar watched as every human on every ship went quiet. That same terrible calm that he had seen at New Haven. But this time, it spread to the other coalition species. They had seen what happened when humans got angry. Some of them wanted to see it again. Some of them wanted to learn how to do it themselves. Lieutenant Hana worked at her tactical station. She had been teaching her methods to other coalition officers. Now they put those lessons into practice. The targeting solutions she created ignored defensive priorities. They focused on making the enemy hurt. Engineer Tae Jun had been sharing his reactor modifications with coalition engineers. Now ships across the fleet began running at power levels that should have been impossible. Speed increased. Weapons output doubled. The fleet moved like an angry swarm. Medic Jiwon had trained other medical personnel in combat situations. They knew what to do when their primary job stopped being healing and started being support for a revenge mission, and Yunsu stood next to Admiral Daeho on the bridge. His face was still blank, still calm. Belthar understood that calm now. It was not peace. It was the eye of a storm. All ships, Daeho said quietly. Remember New Haven. Remember why we fight. Remember what happens when we let evil go unpunished. These creatures think they can hide behind rules and honor while executing civilians. Show them what real consequences look like. The fleet engaged. The sovereigns fought back with their usual professional tactics, careful maneuvers, calculated risks, honorable combat. But they were facing an enemy that had abandoned honor in favor of fury. Coalition ships that had always fought conservatively suddenly adopted human tactics. A Kryn destroyer rammed a sovereign cruiser at full speed. A Vendari captain overloaded her reactor core to take out 3 enemy vessels. Species that had fought wars for centuries were learning a new way. The human way. The sovereigns were confused. This was not how warfare worked. Both sides were supposed to follow the rules. The Ravagers came faster than expected. Their fleet emerged from quantum space 3 days ahead of Velthar's calculations. He adjusted his strategy immediately, pulling the coalition forces into a defensive formation around the core worlds. It was a minor inconvenience, nothing more. The mathematics still favored victory. Then the second report came in. The Ravagers had split their fleet. A smaller force had jumped past the coalition defenses entirely. They were heading toward New Haven, a colony world on the outer rim. Velthar pulled up the data on his screen. 2 million inhabitants, agricultural production, minimal military presence. The world had never been meant as a target. It was too far from strategic locations, too unimportant. But the Ravagers did not care about strategy. They cared about food. And New Haven had 2 million sources of food. Belthar ran the calculations. To save New Haven, he would need to send 30% of his fleet. The journey would take 6 hours. By the time they arrived, the Ravagers would be entrenched. The battle would be costly. Casualties would be high. And while his ships were fighting at New Haven, the main Ravager fleet could break through to the core worlds. The math was clear. New Haven could not be saved. It was regrettable, but war required hard choices. He would evacuate what civilians he could and hold the main defensive line. New Haven would be mourned, but the coalition would survive. That was what mattered. He sent the evacuation order and prepared to explain the decision to his fleet commanders. That was when Captain Daeho's face appeared on his communication screen. "Commander, I request permission to take the human fleet to New Haven," the captain said. "Denied," Velthar replied immediately. "The strategic value does not justify the risk. We are evacuating civilians and holding our current position. 2 million people are on that planet, Commander. I am aware, Captain, and I have 7 billion people on the core worlds to protect. I cannot sacrifice the many for the few." Daeho's jaw tightened. "Commander, with respect, we can reach New Haven before the evacuation is complete. We can buy time for more civilians to escape. You would arrive too late to prevent the initial attack. Your ships would be destroyed for minimal gain. I cannot approve this action, Captain. You will hold your position." For a long moment, Daeho said nothing. Then he nodded slowly. "Understood, Commander." The communication ended. Velthar returned to his strategic displays. The decision was made. Now he needed to focus on the main battle. But something bothered him about the way Daeho had looked at him. There had been something in the human's eyes. Not fear, not anger, something else. 20 minutes later, alarms blared across the flagship. Velthar's second-in-command rushed to his side. "Commander, the human fleet has broken formation. They are heading toward New Haven." Velthar could not believe what he was hearing.
"I denied that request."
"They are disobeying direct orders?" "Yes, Commander. All human vessels have jumped away." Velthar felt fury rise in his chest. This was unacceptable. Humans had no discipline, no respect for the chain of command. He had been right about them. They were too emotional, too chaotic. They would all die at New Haven, and it would be their own fault. He opened a communication channel to Deho's ship, but the captain had blocked all incoming transmissions. The humans were committed to their suicide mission. "Let them go," Velthar said coldly. "Document their disobedience. If any survive, they will face military tribunal." But part of him wondered if any would survive at all. He pulled up the tactical projection of New Haven. The Ravagers would arrive in 4 hours. The human fleet would arrive 30 minutes after that. Too late. The hours passed slowly. Velthar tried to focus on the main battle preparations, but he kept checking the New Haven situation. The evacuation transports were launching from the planet's surface. 50,000 people evacuated. 100,000. 200,000. Not enough. Not nearly enough. Then the Ravagers arrived at New Haven. Velthar watched the sensor data in silence. 20 Ravager ships entered orbit and began bombardment. Cities were targeted first. The agricultural centers, the spaceports, anywhere people gathered. The Coalition listening posts picked up transmissions from the surface, screaming, crying, calls for help that would never come. The human fleet dropped out of quantum space and immediately saw what they were too late to prevent. The planet was burning. Velthar monitored their communications. For a few seconds, there was complete silence on every human channel. Then he heard Deho's voice, tight and controlled. "All ship, scan for survivors. Prepare to engage Ravager forces." Lieutenant Hana's voice came next. She was reading sensor data. "Captain, the southern continent. The bombardment hit the civilian shelters. I'm reading no life signs. 15,000 people were in those shelters, children, families, more silence." Velthar saw the human fleet slowing as they approached the planet. They were scanning, confirming what they already knew. They had arrived too late. A transmission came from the planet's surface. It was audio only, crackling with interference. A child's voice, young, terrified. "Please help us, please, they're coming." The transmission cut off. Velthar waited for the human response. He expected them to retreat. The battle was lost. The planet was doomed. The logical action was to evacuate whoever they could and fall back. That was what any coalition commander would do. Instead, he heard Engineer Taejun's voice. "Captain, I'm overriding safety protocols on all reactor cores. We'll have triple power output." "Do it," Deho said. Lieutenant Hana spoke next. Her voice had changed. The calm professionalism was gone. In its place was something cold and hard. "All weapons are armed. I'm calculating firing solutions." "Calculate for maximum damage," Deho said. "Not maximum efficiency." "Maximum damage," Medic Jiwan's voice joined the channel. "Rerouting life support power to weapon systems. Medical bay is on emergency reserves only." Velthar did not understand what he was hearing. The humans were not retreating. They were not even fighting defensively. They were preparing for an all-out assault. It made no sense. The planet was already lost. What did they hope to achieve? Then Captain Deho spoke one more time. His voice was quiet, but it carried across every human channel. Every ship, every crew member. They killed children. They killed people who could not fight back. People who were hiding in shelters, hoping someone would save them. "We were too late to save them," he paused. Velthar heard something in that pause, something that made his scales prickle with an instinct he did not understand. "But we are not too late to make them pay," Deho finished. "All ships. There is no retreat. There is no surrender. There is only making sure these creatures regret ever coming to New Haven. Engage at will." The human fleet accelerated toward the Ravager forces. Velthar watched on his sensors, expecting a standard attack pattern. Instead, the humans came straight at the enemy. No formations, no tactics, just pure aggression. The first human ship collided with a Ravager destroyer at full speed. Both vessels exploded. Velthar stared at his screen. That had to be an accident, a navigation error. But then another human ship did the same thing. And another. They were ramming the enemy on purpose. They were using their own ships as weapons. This was insane. This was wasteful. This was not warfare. But as Velthar watched the battle unfold, he realized something that chilled him to his core. The Ravagers were falling back. The species that never retreated was retreating. They were retreating from the humans, from small, primitive humans who should have been no threat at all. Velthar had thought he understood war. He was beginning to realize he had only understood part of it. He had understood the science of war. But the humans were teaching him something new. They were teaching him the fury of war, and it was terrifying.